Today we're going to look at prime times and how to make them more effective. I posted the previous clip and we looked at the slice into the ground, and there were some questions about how is this different than prime time. So I want to answer that question and look at some different things that I've done that have changed. I've had kids that do prime times really well, and I didn't see a whole lot of translation, so it made me look at the exercise more closely. Again, what we're looking at is your foot is on that ground and your hips travel 60 degrees. We need to figure out a way on how to travel that 60 degrees as fast as possible. Again, looking at Ken Clark's data, we're looking at the faster runner. It's a quicker contact time because their hips move through that plane over that hinge as quickly as possible. My problem with prime times in the past is most people stop that range of motion right at 30 to 35 degrees, meaning they do a nice job snapping the leg down into the ground, but then they bring that foot up really fast and you don't finish this arc, meaning your hinge has not moved your mass that full range of motion. So typical prime time was that fast, choppy step into the ground, and you can even have bigger ranges of motion, but the point where the foot comes off the ground is generally when the knee is right underneath the butt. And I wanted to get more out of that because I know to get the most out of that time on the ground in that 60-degree range, you've got to help that back half. And that's kind of what the slice is. So the slice is the very beginning. How fast can you bring that leg into the ground? But it's also going to be what happens to get that hip to continue to move forward through that range. So there has to be something on the back end. So if we start with something really simple, it's a very easy, almost jog-like scenario where leg comes straight, pulls through, and look at how much he has coming out of the back end. Where that heel flick, the foot is doing a lot more. You have a much more active foot. And then as we progress things, again, look at how far his knee goes behind his hips. So we're getting to that midpoint and then pushing the hips forward so we get more speed and more power through that range of motion. So here he is doing it with straight legs. You see the heel moving forward, which will be my next presentation. When he comes forward, foot hits, and you can see his hip move all the way through. There's propulsion through that whole range of motion, so he's finishing the slice. Then you can bend your knees a little bit so the lever isn't as long, but it's more realistic, so now you can actually get even more spring because now you're going to use your quads to help push through, which we know that if we look at all the data, that vastus lateralis has a huge role to play to finish this. And again, we see him pull through and get that extension. Heel comes forward, and we can see that knee past the glutes to get that full range of motion. And that's where that spring comes from. That's why he looks so springy, is he's getting something off the back end. So then if we really want to up the ante, we're going to add a cycle with the bounds. So now it becomes even more realistic, where you can see him cycle his leg through as quickly as possible and get that leg back up in a position so it can do more damage. Now we're using the velocities of that snap coming off the ground to reach up and pull through. Other leg is keeping that bound. Again, we can work on timing. There's all kinds of variations you can add to this, which we'll get to later. We can also break it down into a single or a double movement where we're going to put ourselves in a position where we can load that leg in a position, snap it down as fast as possible, and really work on pulling through on that back half. He's adding a little bit of a kick to it. Then I like banded or resisted prime times because you can see that it's all back end here. This is with a bent knee, so he's a little bent over. But now we're getting more out of that back half of the 30. And you can see the ankle has to do a lot more in this position. Here we are on the 1080 doing the same thing. When we slow it down here, we will see just how much he needs in that back end and how much ankle action he needs to get to pull himself forward. Again, there's all kinds of variations you can do on this, but it really focuses on the back half of that 30 when you resist a prime time. Then if we can do resisted, we can also do overspeed, which I think is one of the most underrated uses of overspeed training with the 1080 is doing your drills. Because if you watch, she has to be perfect. Brings that knee up, she has to bring it down and through into a slice, and she has to have that back end. So we just call this a bound. You know, nothing special, but because of the speed, you want to get up in the air, you strike down and through, and then you can see how active that back half is, where she's actually getting somewhere. And pushing her through. Again, the machine is helping her get that distance, but it's the motion that we want to get down, the actual action that we're training. A little too much heel strike for me, but you know, she's getting pulled pretty fast. If you want to get into the weight room and tie this all together, we're going to do a couple cycles, get that leg moving through, and step up and try to push through. Perfect world, you can tie this into a Yuri and really pull through. Here we are doing a Marshall where you've got to get that leg down and extend and push through. Land on one foot just to work on the power of that one leg. Similar thing, snap through and pull through. I have his hands on his head, so he's got to use his torso strength to hold his body in place, because a lot of times when people pull down hard, they break at the torso and their top half goes backwards. You can add a rubber band to this to the top, all kinds of things to make this more difficult. Then of course you have the ultimate, which is just a single leg run where one leg is overemphasizing the whole range of motion in that 60-degree range. If we slow it down, big step up through, overemphasizing it, foot hits, and trying to get a little bit more on that back end there to move through his range of motion. So that's looking at some things you can do with Primetime and how you can make your Primetimes better. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the way you've been doing them, but it's a great warm-up drill, and it's the first half, but I want to make sure that I am using a drill that covers me through the entire range of motion.